Previously on the Star Wars, Vader is Luke's father, Han frozen in carbonite, the whole galaxy's gone to shit, Luke and his rebellion friends are facing the most difficult time they've ever faced, losing their friend Han Solo to the bounty hunter Boba Fett and the crime boss Jabba the Hutt. Luke Skywalker has just learned that his thought-dead father is actually the evil Lord of the Sith, Darth Vader. He's done his Jedi training, but lost his hand in a battle. Will the gang get Han Solo back? Will Luke defeat the Empire and bring balance to the Force? Is making another Death Star a really good idea, or is it there just to sell toys? Find out on the thrilling conclusion to the Swholli Star Wars Special, Episode 6.
Alright, here we go, guys. Episode 6, the big finale. Or, well, what was the big finale, but is now just another sequel. It's the big finale of this particular trilogy, then. Also, holy shit! It's December. Holy shit! Star Wars Episode 7 comes out in like a week. I'm so excited. It's amazing. If there's a way to get a video out right after I see that movie later this month, I might do that. But that's not a given, so we'll just see. So anyway, so now that we've finally gotten to the last episode in the saga, we get to talk about all of it at once. All of the conclusions we've drawn, all of the information we've gathered, all the plots we've explored. We can finally put it all together into one giant-ass conclusion. But that's at the end of this episode. So, let's start discussing episode 6. Number 1. The plot. So episode 6 starts with a bang. Alright, yeah, I get it. Sorry. Jeez. But you know what I've noticed about doing that joke after all these episodes? The prequels really do start with explosions, both literally and figuratively, at roughly the same time in each of them. It's like someone told George Lucas that a good movie has to have a hook, almost like a book's first sentence. Or maybe he realized that after 30 years, what he once thought was cool with the opening crawl is no longer really all that interesting. It's a solid 2 minutes of reading. Nobody really wants to do that anymore, George. It's like he's trying to wake us up after he put us to sleep. So anyway, episode 6 starts again on the desert planet of Tatooine. The infamous Jabba the Hutt, who up until this point we've never really seen. And I know the special edition of episode 4, they added a CGI Jabba, but we're not talking about the special editions. Even though I've been using those for footage, but whatever. Jabba has the carbonite block of Han Solo hanging from his mantle this whole time, and Luke and co are going in there to bust him out. Though, question, has Boba Fett just been, hanging around here this whole time? Did he drop off Han and get his bounty, and Jabba's all like, hey, Boba, you want to, stick around? We're having a giant party that's probably going to last until I die. And he's all like, sure. Whatever. The point of all this is that they get Han back. It's a decent enough sequence, of course, but what I found is that, aside from the last 20 minutes of this movie, this is as exciting as things are going to get. At least for these characters. I mean, following up the masterpiece that was episode 5 and having that followed by the already fantastic episode 4, I understand that at some point you're gonna fail. I mean, I shouldn't think it'd be this bad, but... So what do I mean? Well, see, at this point, our greatest motivation that's carried over from episode 5 was getting Han Solo back. We ended on that shot of Lando and he's all like, we'll get Han back, so this was clearly our motivator for the sequel. I mean... that's kind of an issue when you leave the movie on a cliffhanger like that. You create a sense of wanting for the story. Sure, we all probably really wanted a Star Wars sequel after Episode 4 came out, but we didn't have anything specifically in mind about what it could be. But then Episode 5 is all like, oh shit, we lost Han Solo, we gotta get him back, and that becomes our drive for the next film. But what happened was they sort of wasted that motivation in the first act. You concluded the plot of the previous episode in the first 20 minutes. It was like we blew our load way too soon. It was premature plot ejaculation. That's a thing now. So now we're riding around the galaxy almost like we've got nothing to do. Well, okay, Luke's kind of like, I think I'm forgetting about someone. Yoda! Oh, fuck, Yoda! And he whooshes off to Dagobah. Meanwhile, the Emperor's all like, hey, Darth, listen, Skywalker, he's gonna turn to the dark side, I just know it. And Han and Leia are like, well, shit, Ewoks. And then they basically get nothing to do. See, at this point, nothing is the same as it was originally meant to be in the first drafts of the script. George hasn't actually written the plot to Star Wars since '77. He's just sort of let other more, competent screenwriters do that. But George also had one thing in mind this time, toy sales. And while I don't believe he's really a terrible person for doing what he did to make money, I mean, if I were in a situation to make bajillions of dollars, I think we all know I'd totally do that, and you would too, don't even lie. However, as a filmmaker, I think I might not have made as many decisions based on my wallet as he did. See, in the original draft of Jedi, Han just fucking dies in the second act. Like, legit, he just dies. That's what they've said. And at the very end of the film, Luke isn't even supposed to get a happy ending. He's just supposed to walk away like a spaghetti western. But Lucas just changed all of it to try and sell toys. So now it's like, what are we supposed to do with these guys? Well, they gotta do something. Let's put them on Endor. Yay. Anyway, the whole Jabba's palace scene and the resulting escape were really cool sequences, but at this point the plot is basically all muddled up because Lucas didn't want to take any story risks, and instead he wanted to make as much money as possible. If you have to keep Han alive for the whole movie, then what should have at least happened was that the Luke and Vader and the Empire stuff was taking place on one side of the story, and the rest of the characters should have been searching for Han frozen in carbonite for the whole rest of the film. And then in the end, you could have converged all the plot points together like you did at the Empire, and then the whole plot could have still had a happy ending, and you could have still sold a bunch of toys. I mean, they followed the structure just fine. Each character has his or own diverging plot points, and they never do get too overly complicated, but there are still probably way better ways to do it. So anyway, while on Dagobah, Yoda just fucking dies. But then it takes him like an hour just to do it. Just fucking die already! Why does Yoda fade away like that? Like, Qui-Gon didn't fade away when he died. I mean, Obi-Wan kind of does, I guess, but that's maybe how you become a Force ghost. But then Vader doesn't fade away, and yet he still gets to be a ghost. What the fuck? Whatever, Obi-Wan is there as a ghost. He takes Luke aside, and he's basically like, okay, so I fucking lied to you? Now, see, the funny thing is a lot of people don't really seem to like the fact that Obi-Wan lied to Luke, and it was just sort of Lucas trying to cover tracks in terms of plot holes. So that's why Obi-Wan just sort of says the whole certain point of view nonsense, and that's all fair criticism. But as for on a character level, and I do think this is partially due to Alec Guinness's really fine acting, I think he puts some meaning behind the lines in his performance. And I mean, he's a great actor. So when he delivers it, and now especially knowing what we actually know, having seen the whole story take place in Episode 3, there's actually a real sadness there. And sure, while it's sort of a weak backtrack to just try and wave away the mistakes he made, it's also a totally real conclusion I could see Obi-Wan coming to. Anakin was his best friend, and he betrayed him terribly and became the greatest force of evil in the galaxy. It'd be pretty hard to talk about that sort of thing. He'd be too hard-pressed to even want to admit it was true, so he came up with this nice and easy lie for Luke to swallow so that he could just pretend it all wasn't real. Alright, anyway, Yoda's dead, so Luke goes back to Han and Leia, who are about to pull off some dangerous shield generator stuff, and they get separated, and Luke goes off to confront Vader. Meanwhile, Lando and people are trying to blow up the second Death Star. All in all, this is where the film just starts to fall apart, like I said. Because now our characters are stuck doing nothing for the rest of the movie. Sure, getting the shield generator down is important, and they're not technically doing nothing, but compared to the things that we've seen these characters do, not only in the other films, but even earlier in this very movie, this is just boring. And of course, now there are a bunch of EWOKS. EWOKS are probably everybody's original understanding of why George Lucas was going downhill. Sure, Jar Jar basically came along and made EWOKS look respectable, but at the time, they were the dumbest thing on the planet. See, the problem most people have with the EWOKS are two things. One, they're just teddy bears. They're just far too cute to be an alien creature in this universe. let alone one that gets to be featured in most of the movie. I mean, compared to the creepy aliens that are in the cantina and the bounty hunters that we see in Empire, and even Jabba the Hutt at the beginning of this movie, Ewoks just stand out as this goofy plush doll intended only to sell toys. They're just too campy. Secondly, it came down to them being able to perfectly destroy Imperial forces with just sticks and rocks. Now sure, from a thematic sense, it works well within the Star Wars universe, like little guys standing up to the big guys and winning, yeah, that's fine, but there was never any sense that they might fail. They just tore through Stormtrooper armor with a spear, for God's sake. I bet you in the new Battlefront game on Endor, nobody's going around playing as the Ewoks. It's because no one wants to. Wow, this looks like so much fun! So the real juicy bits of the story finally take place when Luke surrenders himself to Vader. Really, all of the end confrontation scenes with the Emperor are the best moments of the entire film. Everything else up to this point is just filler as far as I'm concerned. Vader and Luke have a final duel that Luke wins. Luke ultimately doesn't give in to the Empire and Vader throws him down a hole. He dies. Frowny face. They blow up the second Death Star and everybody has a big old celebration. Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun. If you're wondering why I'm being so sparse on the ending of the film and not more in depth, it's because my second point is really more concerned with that. Because it's time to address the second fan theory I was going to talk about. Number 2, more fan theory and the ending to this movie. So basically, an article was making rounds back in October, and the gist of the argument is that Luke already turned to the dark side by the end of Jedi. Now, while this is cool and all, I personally don't think whoever wrote the article was actually all that wise about the actual philosophy Star Wars is based on. I mean, I've talked about it before in another video. Star Wars is just Zen philosophy, even more so shown by the way it's presented in Empire. Zen philosophy is about finding balance. It's about inner peace and enlightenment versus the brute force of just being inherently right or wrong. My take on the ending of Jedi was something even still further from what's supposed to be the true ending and what this theory suggests. See, to me, Luke did let the dark side in. He did use hate, anger, fear, and power to his advantage, and it helped him defeat his father. But when he looks at his father's robo-hand and then down to his own, he realizes the truth. His father is, as Obi-Wan put it,
he's more machine now than man.
This was a metaphor for the system. The machine. Vader is personification of the system, as Joseph Campbell said in his Power of Myth interview.
Well, I think that the Star Wars is a valid mythological perspective, and the problem of is the machine and the state is the machine. Is the machine going to crush humanity or serve humanity? And humanity comes not from the machine, but from the heart.
Luke, help me take this mask off.
But you'll die.
I think it was in the Return of the Jedi when Skywalker unmasks his father. The father had been playing one of these machine roles, a state role. He was the uniform, you know? And the removal of that mask was an undeveloped man there. It was kind of a worm. By being executive of a system, one is not developing one's humanity. I think that George Lucas really did a beautiful thing there.
See, and then Luke looks down at his own robot hand, and he realizes that very hand is what helped him do what he just did. A little bit of the machine was necessary to win, so long as he didn't let it consume him and become more than just himself, like Vader had. So in the end, Luke realizes that the dark side and the light side are both just basically bullshit. What he does instead is he realizes that there's merits to both ways of thinking, and both ways have helped him defeat the evil in the world. I mean, after all, one of the most intense moments of the whole series, thanks of course in part to John Williams' amazing score here, we witnessed Luke just wail on Vader like there's no tomorrow. He's just angry, and he's tense, and he's letting loose. And then, when he has Vader cowering before him, much like how Vader once had him at the end of Empire, he stops. He stops himself. He is able to control his emotions. He doesn't need to repress them like the Jedi, and he doesn't need to always act upon them like the Sith. He simply has them under control, and he is able to flat out say no to the Emperor's temptations. Luke, at this point, is probably the most powerful Force wielder to ever exist. He was tempted with the easy path, and he fucking walked away. See, the prophecy Lucas always babbled on about in the prequels still comes true. But it wasn't Vader just throwing the Emperor down that hole that brought the balance to the Force and defeated the Sith. It was Vader filling Luke with enough hatred to realize the power and the advantage of the dark side, while Luke was still able to insist on the morality of the light side. Luke becomes a Jedi who understands the dark side, just as Vader becomes a Sith who understands the light side. Therefore, he defeats the Sith because the Sith no longer exist, and neither do the Jedi. Together, Luke and Anakin as father and son have actually brought balance to the Force, in that it's the true definition of balance. And in my opinion, that meshes well with the whole pseudo-Zen philosophy Star Wars operates on versus a boring good versus evil trope. Plus, as goofy as it was, George's sudden inclusion of a prophecy in the prequels about Anakin bringing balance to the Force now actually makes a whole lot of sense. Number 3, the recap so far. Well, wait, this whole video is not over yet. Just as far as episode 6 goes, we're finally finished with this story, so before I do the whole conclusion segment, I figured we'd get this freaking recap out of the way. See, if I had known that these things were going to get so long when I started the project, I'd have waited until the end to do the recap instead of building onto it each episode, but oh well, we're in too deep now, so here we go. Obi-Wan Kenobi had a master named Qui-Gon Jinn who was near and dear to him. Just before finishing their mission together, Qui-Gon is killed by a Sith Lord who Obi-Wan then also kills. He is now tortured by that loss. Anakin Skywalker is a small, soon-to-be Jedi with great power and potential to bring balance to the Force. Obi-Wan swore he would mentor the young boy and teach him the ways of the Force. The Trade Federation, who are separatists with their droid army, are secretly being backed by the Sith. It's very heavily implied at the end of the film that the newly elected Chancellor of the Republic, Palpatine, is actually the evil Dark Lord. Years later, Padme was under threat of assassination, so now Obi-Wan and Anakin, who has now grown up, are in charge of her protection. While working, they undercover the assassin and track her down. Obi-Wan, figuring out her employer, goes off to find him. Meanwhile, Anakin continues to protect Padme. While protecting her, he learns the fate of his mother on Tatooine and goes to rescue her. She dies, and through his vengeful anger, he gets his first taste of the dark side. Obi-Wan discovers an army of clone soldiers and brings them back to the Republic, thus starting the Clone Wars. The Sith make themselves known to the Jedi, and Anakin loses his hand in a fight with Count Dooku. Anakin and Padme get married, an act that's forbidden by the Jedi Order, thus needing it to be kept secret and set in motion their eventual emotional downfall. After the Clone Wars are well underway, Padme reveals to Anakin that she's pregnant, but immediately Anakin starts having dreams of her dying during childbirth. Also, almost immediately, Anakin starts looking for a way to save her. After a lengthy investigation, it is learned that Palpatine is in fact the Sith Lord that they've been looking for, and an arrest attempt is made. After it fails, Palpatine issues Order 66 and effectively eradicates all Jedi sans a few. Anakin, being told by Palpatine that together they can save Padme's life, swears his allegiance to the dark side and becomes the evil Dark Lord, Darth Vader. Obi-Wan and Anakin fight, and Anakin loses, resulting in him being put in the robot suit and forever sealing his place by the side of the newly created Galactic Empire. Padme dies during childbirth, thus twins Luke and Leia are given up for adoption to be hidden from their father. Yoda and Obi-Wan go into hiding and await the day a new hope will arise. 20 years later, Luke is fully grown and living with his aunt and uncle on the farm on Tatooine. A rebellion that started against the Empire has stolen plans for their new superweapon, the Death Star, and are trying to escape with them above the planet Tatooine. The plans are accidentally sent down for Luke to find. Attracting the help of Obi-Wan Kenobi, now old and wise, and going by the name Ben Kenobi, Luke, Ben, and the droids meet up with the pilots Han Solo and Chewbacca in order to bring the plans to the rebellion. Ben does his best to instruct Luke in the ways of the Force. They reach the planet of the rebel leaders but find it destroyed by the Death Star. They're tractor beamed onto the ship where they rescue the princess, lose Ben to Darth Vader, and make their way to the rebel outpost. The heroes mount their offensive against the Empire by destroying their giant weapon, the Death Star, and proving that the rebellion is actually a force to be reckoned with and that Luke is on the path of becoming a Jedi himself. A few years later, the rebels are still trying to take on the Empire and they've relocated their base on Hoth. While on a routine scouting mission, Han and Luke find a probe droid attempting to locate them. Luke is knocked out by a Wampa and the ghost of Ben visits him to tell him to go to the planet Dagobah and seek out Yoda. After escaping the Empire once more, Han and Leia attempt to make their way to Bespin. They have a lot of romantic entanglements on the way there. Luke makes his way to Dagobah, where he begins to learn about the Force from Yoda. Han and Leia make their way to Bespin, where they're betrayed by the Empire and Han Solo is frozen in carbonite and shipped off to Boba Fett. Luke confronts Vader for the first time, where he reveals to him that he was actually Luke's father. Luke manages to lose his hand and replace it with a robotic one. We end on a cliffhanger where everything has gone terrible and our heroes are at their lowest possible point. There is nowhere left to go from here but up. Sometime later, Luke, Leia, Lando, Chewie, and the droids all hatch a plan to rescue Han from Jabba's palace. They succeed and escape, making their way back to the rebel fleet. Luke travels once more to Dagobah to learn that it is in fact true. Vader really is Luke's father. Yoda dies, and Ben confides in Luke that he actually has a twin sister, Leia. Vader and the Emperor have constructed a new Death Star, and our heroes decide to run another offensive on it in order to stop it just like before. They even learn that the Emperor is on board and could assassinate him if they were to succeed. Luke confronts Vader a last time and is ultimately successful. Vader, in a triumph of returning to the light side, throws the Emperor down a hole, finishing him off for good. The two leave as the Death Star explodes. Vader dies, Luke burns the body, and he and the rest of our heroes look off into the sunset as they realize that the Empire has been virtually defeated. Luke smiles as the ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin Skywalker, who in death is no longer the evil Darth Vader, look upon him and smile back. Our heroes have won, and have brought peace throughout the galaxy and balance to the Force. Number 4. What can we conclude about Star Wars? Well, surprisingly, we've made it to the end of the original trilogy, and the end of the prequels, and the end of the Star Wars special. Good God, am I tired. The only video left to make after this one is the Episode 7 predictions video, and then it's off to see the movie for the first time in theaters. So what can we conclude about Star Wars as a whole? Well, we've learned how not to tell a story, okay? We've learned how shoddy characters, disappointing dialogue, and emotionless plots are, unsurprisingly, a terrible way to make a film. Action scenes that become too much about the action and not enough about the characters performing the actions are lifeless and dull to watch. Telling a backstory to an already successful one usually ends up terribly because it isn't a story we need to hear. We already know the ending before we start, and it's just not fun to watch. However, on the flip side, we've learned how to properly tell a story by keeping it simple and engaging. There's no need for fancy plot details or convoluted twists and turns at every point. All we need is a simple character motivation, realistic people with realistic goals, even within a fantasy universe. The fantasy should only ever be there to make sure that telling a good story is easier. And the same thing could be said about special effects. We've learned to trust our audience to be smart, and not to be afraid to give them ideas that are a bit heavier on the whole thinking thing. And of course, we've learned the most important thing is to just make a movie because you want to tell a story and make the movie. Do not make a movie simply because you want to sell toys. Oh, and possibly we've seen the literal best scene ever put to cinema. Okay, I know I love Episode 5 and it's largely contended as the greatest Star Wars in the series, but despite all of that, I still think that the final trench run approach at the end of Episode 4 is by and large the greatest, most suspenseful thing ever. Even after years of seeing it, I still get goosebumps wondering if Luke is going to make it and sink that shot that blows up the Death Star each time.
His computer's off. Luke, you switched off your targeting computer. What's wrong?
Nothing. I'm all right.
I have you now.
out!
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Oh, and I think also most importantly we've learned to always be original and never try to rip off an existing work. Something I will never, ever do.
Continued in part 2.